Good afternoon, students. So today we will see the third chapter of the fourth module of cryptography, network security and cyber law, and the name of the chapter is Intrusion Prevention and Detection System. So in this we are going to see the two separate parts, what you mean by intrusion prevention and what is intrusion detection system is. So first we'll see what is the definition of an intrusion and what are the examples of it. An intrusion is the act of gaining unauthorized access to a system so as to cause loss or a harm. So intrusion, you might have already heard the name. It is nothing but gaining access, that is illegal gaining access to the resources which may cause the damage to that resource. So examples of the intrusion include the following: unauthorized login to a system by illegally acquiring a password, worm infections that use the system as a launch pad to spread and infect other machines, injection of spyware that passively monitors the activities of the user and relays this information back to the attacker, flooding the host with spurious connection requests that attempt to exhaust the target's resources, that is processing power, memory or communication bandwidth. So these are the examples of the intrusion. So there are two ways of handling these intrusions so that it does not damage your system or any resources using it. So one, we call it as an intrusion prevention, another is an intrusion detection. So we'll see both what is an intrusion prevention system is and what is intrusion detection system is. So intrusion prevention, it anticipates various kinds of attacks and takes steps to forestall their occurrence. On the one hand, the programmer should adopt practices that help reduce or eliminate software vulnerabilities. So here prevention is nothing but what? That the types of examples of an intrusion which we have seen in the last slide, so those should not happen in your system. So what are the major practices you adopted so that these kind of attacks will not happen on your system? So that we call it as a prevention. The use of safe string manipulation function in C or a C++ and the use of parameterized SQL queries are some of the practices recommended to protect against buffer overflow and SQL injection attacks respectively. So if you use safe string manipulation function in C or a C++, then it may avoid the buffer overflow condition in the program. Or else if you use parameterized SQL queries, then it may avoid the SQL injection attack to happen on your system. Likewise, sanitizing user input from HTML forms is one preventive measure against cross-site scripting attacks. Another set of preventive measures may be taken by computing system. For example, it may be a hardware compiler or operating system to provide a second line of defense. Extensive training should be imparted to system administrator on this and related tasks. Finally, users should be trained to adhere to sound security practices such as password protection and be educated on the variety of social engineering attacks. One final aspect of intrusion prevention is deterrence. Hacking, whether for fun or profit, is a criminal offense. So these are the some of the preventive measures you can take it on your system so as to prevent the intrusion. Intrusion detection. Remember, the detection is nothing but allow your system to enter into the intrusion state, and after that whether the intrusion has happened on your system or not, you check it. That we call it as a detection. That is nothing but allow the attack to happen on your system, detect it and then take a preventive measure on that. An intrusion detection system, which is shown in the next slide figure, performs the following three tasks. So first we'll see that figure. So now this is exactly the task performed by that. intrusion detection system. So first it monitors the various systems or network variables. The first task it does, it monitors events of interest occurring in the target system or in the network. An event of interest may be a system call nothing but a call made to the operating system. For example, opening a file containing the sensitive data, or it may be attempted establishment of a TCP connection from a specific IP address to a certain port. Second step is that, or a second task what the IDS performs is it generates a large amount of data which it then analyzes and converts into the valuable information to be used by the system administrator. So this is what, after monitoring the various system or a network variables, it collects some interesting patterns. Then those patterns will be analyzed, recent value or behavior of the variable. That is what a second task, which will be converted into the valuable information which to be used by the system administrator. Then these are the examples of a thresholds and parameter sets by a human. On the other hand, it would be highly desirable if the intrusion detection system were capable of learning what is normal behavior, detecting anomalous events when they occur, and flagging such events. Then there are number of key questions related to IDS functioning and deployment. What are the variables that the IDS should monitor? When should an alert be raised? When should an alarm be sounded? Where should the IDS be placed? So before studying these examples, we'll see one case study of it. So here, after converting the sensitive data or interesting pattern into the valuable information, then that valuable information is going to match with the patterns which are already stored in the database, and if there is a match found, then raise an alert or an alarm. If no match is found, then go for, is it a anomalous behavior which is not already stored in the database, then also you raise an alert or an alarm. This is what exactly the task performed by an IDS. Then a case study, that is unauthorized user logins. To prevent unauthorized logins owing to compromised password, the following should be adhered to. A password should be at least 8 characters long, hard to guess, and include at least one non-alphanumeric character. A password should be changed at least once in 2 months. Password should be stored securely and should not be communicated to friends, relatives and co-workers. After 3 consecutive unsuccessful attempts to a specific account, the system should be designed to disable all further login attempts for next 20 minutes. So these are the preventive measures the user has to do, or the user has to take, so that the unauthorized user login may not happen in your system. So if you see here, rule 1 and 2 should be observed by the user, though they can and must be enforced by the system. Rule 3 involves the user alone, while rule 4 involves the system alone. So these rules are all measures intended to prevent the intrusion. As a further preventive measure, a high security organization may mandate 2-factor authentication, that is password in conjunction with the biometric. So in addition to prevention, an IDS may also be deployed to monitor suspicious logins. For example, consider an employee who for 5 years have never logged in outside of office hours. If now, after 5 years, the same user were to log in at 4 AM, the IDS should raise an alert. So this is what exactly the preventive measures you can take it, and you can raise a alarm or a alert. So the type of intrusion detection system. Real world IDS monitors and mines hundred of variables for interesting patterns. So few of the variables we have collected together in a table 22.1 together with a condition that may trigger an alert. Some of the variables are mere bit patterns in the packet header or the packet payload. Other variables are counts of certain occurrences within a time interval. So now if you see the variables, the number of accesses to specific file, login frequency to particular account, number of distinct source IP addresses of arriving packets, ratio of ARPANET request packets to ARPANET response packets, ratio of TCP synchronization packet to TCP finished packet, percentage of half open TCP connections, TCP header flags, TCP connection establishment, payload of incoming packets, operating system calls. So these are the variables. So out of this, so what exactly we can check the information of that is tenfold increase over normal, that is how many number of attempts the user has made to access to the specific file. Then login frequency to particular account unusually high, the number of distinct source IP addresses of arriving packets very high, ratio of ARP request packet to ARP response packet is greater than 1, ratio of TCP synchronization packet to synchronization finished packet is also greater than 1, percentage of half open TCP connection sudden surge, TCP header flags contain invalid combination, TCP connection establishment unused destination port, payload of incoming packet specific bit sequence present, operating system calls particular sequence of calls. So these are the interesting pattern. So and if you see that pattern, based on that, these are the possible type of a attack may happen on your system, that is denial of service attack or a flash event, attempted break-in, worm attack, network scan to identify local active hosts, possible denial of service attack, possible denial of service or distributed denial of service attack, port scan, operating system fingerprints, attempt to find which services are open, specific worm attack, specific virus attack. So these are the some of the variables which can be monitored by the IDS. So next we classify intrusion detection system based on their functionality. So there are two classification we have made. One is a anomaly versus signature based IDS and another is host based versus network based IDS. So what are these types of IDS? We'll see in detail one by one. So first one, it's a anomaly based IDS. Anomaly based intrusion detection involves making a determination whether the behavior of a system is statistically significant departure from normal. So here in this anomaly based intrusion detection system, we have to monitor the behavior of the system against the normal one. And if you see, it is going to vary or it is going to increase the normal usage or a normal behavior, then we can say it is a intrusion detection system. The IDS will have to learn over time what constitutes normal activity, usage and a behavior. So whatever the example we have seen in a table 22.1, the first 6 conditions are the examples of anomaly based IDS which would monitor. Now consider monitoring the number of TCP synchronization packets and the finished packets in each successive 10-second interval. A disproportionate number of synchronization packets versus a finished packets indicates several half open TCP connection and possibly the onset of a synchronization flooding attack. So this is what the anomaly based IDS. In signature based IDS, which is also called as a misuse detection, it works by identifying specific patterns of events or behavior that indicate or accompany an attack. Each such pattern is called as a signature. A signature-based IDS maintains a database of known signatures. It attempts to obtain a match between the currently observed behavior of the system and an entry in this database. A real-world signature-based IDS will have thousands of attack signatures against which to compare. An example of attack signature is a specific bit sequence in a worm payload. In a signature-based IDS, it is the presence of a specific signature that raises an alert. On the other hand, it is possible that a spread of the worm has caused much network traffic congestion and greatly increased CPU utilization on infected machines. So here in the signature-based IDS, the first thing is that the system need to identify the specific patterns of event or a behavior that indicate or accompany an attack. Once it is going to identify that type of a signatures are going to be stored in a database. Once it is stored in a database, the currently observed behavior of the system is going to match with the entry in the database. As the database is going to have thousands of entries of the signature, those are going to be compared, and based on that it is going to report or raise an alarm. So next is a host-based IDS versus network-based IDS. A host-based IDS is typically implemented in software and resides on top of the host operating system. Its main job is to monitor the internal behavior of the host, such as the sequence of system calls made, the files accessed, etc. For this purpose, it makes use of a system logs, application logs, and operating system audit trails to identify events related to an intrusion. Operating system logs, for example, keep track of when user logs in, the number of unsuccessful login attempts, the commands executed, network connections made, etc. The application logs keep track of which files have been opened or which registry key have been accessed during the run of an application. File system integrity checkers, for example, compute a cryptographic hash on the content of each file. They detect file changes by comparing the computed hash of a file to its stored hash. So this is nothing but a host-based IDS, which is typically implemented in a software and it resides on the top of the host operating system. Then the network-based IDS, which captures the information about packets flowing through the network. For the reason of performance, it is common to have standalone appliances that perform network-based intrusion detection. These typically run only the IDS and are hence not vulnerable to various worm and virus attacks. They may be deployed at multiple points in a large organization. Then there are main two features of IDS, which are nothing but a speed and a accuracy. Speed is especially important in fast spreading internet worms. For example, early worm detection and early response mechanisms such as automated system shutdown can help reduce the number of infected machines. Thus, IDS should be able to detect every instance of an intrusion. An undetected intrusion is referred as false negative. Then distributed denial of service attack prevention and detection. Distributed denial of service prevention, which consists of two main parts. One is preventive measures at the host and preventive measures inside the network. So in this we'll see preventive measures at the host, and in the next video we'll see the remaining part of this chapter. So preventive measures at the host. One possible way of handling synchronization attacks is to drop request for TCP connections. So here main thing is that the client and a server, they need to have a communication between them, and before start communicating with each other they need to establish a connection. So they try to establish the connection and to drop the request for TCP connection is a one possible way of handling this synchronization attack. But this could result in collateral damage if the victim is unable to distinguish between the synchronization packet that are part of the attack and those from its legitimate clients. So one way to reduce collateral damage is to categorize IP addresses as almost certainly genuine, probably spoofed, etc. The almost certainly genuine addresses are those with whom normal connections were established and terminated in the past. Under rapidly increasing load, packets with unfamiliar source IP addresses are discarded with high probability. So another strategy under high load condition is to allocate a full buffer of about 300 bytes for a given TCP connection. Request only upon completion of a three-way handshake. So here the major task is it has to complete the three-way handshake. If it is unable to complete it, then we'll come to know that it is a synchronization packet attack. So based on that, the request is going to be dropped. While the connection is still half open, minimal information about it is stored in a hash table called synchronization cache. This information includes the TCP sequence numbers and source and destination IP addresses and port numbers. An alternative to the synchronization cache is the synchronization cookie, which stores no state information at all for each half open connection. Instead, the responding machine places a cookie within the sequence number field of the second handshake message. The cookie is computed as a hash function of the source address, source port, destination port, and a secret. The initiator of the connection dispatches the cookie it just received in its acknowledgement message, that is third message of the three-way handshake. So remember, first it sends a synchronization packet, first message. Second one is going to compute the cookie, and that cookie has been added to that message which will be sent from the another side, that is the second message. And third message is nothing but the acknowledgement message. Upon receiving the acknowledgement, the responder recalculates the cookie and verifies that it matches with the value enclosed in the received acknowledgement. Only then does it reserve the buffer space for the connection. If the source IP address in the first message of the handshake were spoofed, the cookie in the second message would not be received by the initiator but by the machine corresponding to the spoofed IP address. The initiator would not be able to complete the three-way handshake since it does not know the cookie value. Hence, its connection request would not be granted buffer space. So this is how exactly they will take a preventive measures at the host side so as to avoid this synchronization packet attack. So the further part of this chapter we'll see in the next video.